Well, good morning and welcome to the session on the talent challenge in emerging markets. Thank you for coming. I'm Nikhil Oja, a partner with Bain & Company, and I'll be the moderator for this session. Before I introduce my distinguished panelists, just a few words to set the frame. Now, we are at the growth net, so it probably makes sense to start from there. And the first question is, what is the source of advantage that these emerging countries are looking at when thinking about their growth? Is it a low factor cost model or is it a high value addition model? But given this session and in general also, there's at least one other axis that is important to note when thinking about this issue in its entirety, and that is what is the model for skilling the labor force. And that's essentially because, why it's important to look at both these axes together is because while growth itself is not a given, whether growth happens or not or at what rate is a big question, as we in India have seen over the last 12 to 24 months. But the more fundamental question is that the nature of growth and the future that it creates is actually going to be very different in these four quadrants. So, whether the growth is factor condition or value addition, and whether we actually have widespread collective action towards skilling or it remains sporadic and incremental. So if you see the map on the screen and think of all the stuff that's on the south of this map, whether it's a situation where we remain a low labor cost based economy and we do not do much in terms of widespread collective action and skilling, we really are in for not a very good future with even possibility of massive industrial unrest, because you have a low factor condition, a low labor cost based growth, and you're not skilling the labor. You will have disparities between the permanent and the contractual labor, et cetera, et cetera. Even on the other side, it's really a situation which is more like paradise lost. You can get into high value addition based growth, but if you do not skill the labor, we really are looking at not realizing our full potential when it comes to employment generation. As you move north on this map, you can have, you get into a situation where you can either play defense or you can have offense in terms of what you do with skilling the labor. The defensive outcome is that you remain a low labor cost based economy, but there is good action around either labor relations or actually terms of employment and such like. And there's better labor conditions, but essentially we remain as low cost based competitiveness in terms of our growth. It's only when you think of a scenario which is really high value addition based and has widespread collective action on skilling that you think of something which we have labeled harmonious society, which really allows us to get to full potential of the economy and make sure that the growth is not just for the sake of growth, but actually drives welfare. So, by the way, it's not straightforward. Any human-related scale up is essentially linear. While as you move to the right on this map, your complexity increases in a very non-linear fashion. So that's really what I wanted to talk about in framing this discussion. Let me now quickly introduce my very distinguished panelists. Mr. S. Ramadorai, Vice Chairman of TCS, Cabinet Rank Advisor to the Prime Minister of India in the National Council for Skill Development. Professor Wang Huayo, Director General, Center for China and Globalization from PRC, and Mr. Mauro Aguiar, who is the president at Bantech from Brazil. So without much further ado, maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Ramadorai. What kind of collaborative mechanisms do you see being required between businesses, government, academia to make sure that skilling actually happens of the sort that the industry needs?
Good morning, everyone. See, finding the right skill at the right time is not one country phenomena, but it's a concern for every corporation in every part of the world. And in many cases, it's even more acute in the emerging markets. Now, the lack of educated workforce requires, with the requisite skills, whether it's technical management, mathematics, or science, is a major bottleneck slowing the growth in definitely many of the emerging market economies. The gaps which you requested is the industry and the education system have more bridges between them at various stages of the educational progression. The skill gap is the least when they have bridging from one to the other. This is seen in successful Swiss or the German models of apprenticeship and learning on the job, where students at the age of 16 start working as apprentices in companies for a few days during the week, and other days they spend in the theory lessons, whether it is in the government-run vocational schools. So if you take our own country in India, the government, industry and the academia are operating in silos, and hence the low employability of students. So I have certain recommendations, whether it's the government, whether it's the academia or the industry. When they look at the government must engage with those segments of society which industry will not find profitable. Example, the rural or the BPL or the other disadvantaged groups, or even for the private sector to get involved. Some of the CSR funds in the recent budget are of significance. The government must enable financial mechanisms and support the ecosystem. Example, credit to the students. The third, government must monitor and create feedback mechanism for continuous improvement. It has to become a habit. When you talk about the academia, how they should engage with the industry, they should engage with the industry for the faculty sabbaticals, making industry experience mandatory for the faculty every 5 years. Unless they have the hands-on experience in the industry, the faculty will not be relevant to the students or to the market that is out there. Encouraging visiting faculty from the industry is another way to approach the problem. And then you need to revisit the curriculum every 2 years, because the curriculum gets obsolete, and if it's not relevant, that's another important measure. And research collaborations between the industry and the academia. Finally, the industry must jointly devise areas for research, or even outsource their research to the academic community, or house their R&D within the academic institutions so that that ecosystem gets created. And then incubate research, but then the top companies must create platforms for conferences and interactions with the academic interface, and they must also develop very strong apprenticeship and internship programs. This is what I would say are the gaps that need to be addressed by the industry, by the academic institutions, as well as the government, and they must integrate together. The aspiration based on what you showed us, those 4 quadrants, everybody want to be on the right-handmost quadrant.
Thank you. And indeed, we'll come back to you for sure with questions. And while everyone wants to be on the top right quadrant, really it's going to take a number of the efforts that you outlined in a concerted fashion to actually get there. Professor Wang, over to you next. And as you saw the top right quadrant, it was not by fluke that it was labeled harmonious society. That is, leader Hu Jintao's phrase for what his ideology was. So what I and the audience, I'm sure, would be very interested in knowing is what's the sort of things that China has done to actually move the society forward towards a more 21st century economy and towards some of the outcomes on the top right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think you raised a very good question. As we all know, that China has been booming in the last 30 years. But basically, we see that China has been booming is relied on the major sources of migrant workers, which I said, I just laid out in the chart, that labor intensive and low cost. But as China climbing on the value chain and trying to be from made in China to create in China, and then that's really the challenge that comes in, the talent challenge. So now China actually put out a national talent development plan in 2010, and I was actually participating in drafting that. And in that plan, it has stipulated that in the next 10 years, China is going to have 200 million college graduates among its working population. So there's a big shift from 200 million migrant workers to 200 million college graduates among the working population. And that's really the challenge, I think, lies in. And that's where the government has to take a lot of plans to address the needs of this talent development. And we can see that China has enjoyed really the population dividend in the last 30 years. But that population dividend is running out, and China has to change that into talent dividend. So what China is doing actually is trying to, first of all, reform the education system. And China, the Minister of Education has trying to put up some plan to, trying to get the Chinese education system in place, and then including informing the new entrance examination that China is having a lot of problem. But second, I think China has been doing quite effectively in the past 5 years. That during the last government in section, that we actually also made some recommendation on that. China has successfully launched the 1,000 Talent Program, which for the past 5 years, China has attracted about 3,300 top-notch scientists from all over the world. And for example, of the tenured professor, China has attracted for the last 5 years equals 20 times of what has been done in the last 30 years. So that's been quite effective. And also, China's People's Congress in last June has actually promulgated a new law, foreigners in entry and exit law, and set up a new category about talent visa, that really for the overseas talent. And then also, for the last quarter, actually, China has just recently improved its green card system. And in the old days, the green card was just a visa to get in. Now the green card has been really made it a real green card that has enjoying all the benefits of local citizens except the voting rights. So I think China has been making a lot of progress. However, I think China has something to learn from India as well. For example, India has in the past been really effective doing the overseas Indian citizenship, and also the person of Indian origin. And then, as I know, that India has issued about over 11 million cards like that to the overseas Indians, whereas India has about 25, 30 million overseas Indians, and that's quite a big percentage. And China has about 45, 50 million overseas Chinese. And then now they are having problem coming back to China every time they have the private visa. So that's really a challenge. I think finally, probably not only China and India, but for our world, we have to dealing with this talent movement that is happening all over the world. I have a theory about globalization, because basically we have a globalization. The first phase is globalization of goods. We have a WTO, and China and India doing very well on that. And we have second wave of globalization of capital movements. And then that's IMF and all the rest is also taking care and improving that. And then China and India still probably catch up on that capital movements. But third wave is this globalization of talents. Now we have so many students, diaspora, and people immigrant to other countries. For example, last year, China, the new figures, China has about 400,000 students going to study abroad, become the largest student-sending country in the world, and half of them go to the United States. And also, China has actually been the largest immigrant country, 80,000 immigrants to the United States last year. So it's a lot of movement around the world. So I think, for the goods movement, we have a WTO, and for the capital movement, we have IMF. Yet there's no world organization that's taking care of this 20% top-notch talents movement. So I would suggest maybe we should consider setting up a new WTO, World Talent Organization, that really taking care of this talent movement and maybe credential recognitions and also people movement. And then I think by utilizing the talents, not only diaspora, but also foreign talents, international global talents coming to China and to India, that really will make China develop and make India and all the other emerging market develops. That's my comment.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And before I open up for questions, which I'm sure people will have lots of, given where China has achieved, or what China has achieved over the last 20 years. Mr. Agar, as the leader at Bantech, and also as someone who leads one of the finest higher education in the school system in Brazil, what I wanted to check with you was, we need skilling and we need skill development. But we need to also do that without sacrificing the principles of education. Education has to be much broader than just about the job. How would education sector leader such as you think about balancing these two requirements?
In my opinion, there is no contradiction between what the school system has to teach and the needs of 21st century and society. The school system has to teach the students at least their own language, math, science, English, and one more foreign language. What happened in Brazil and the most Latin American countries, we did a big mistake last century. We did not invest in primary and secondary education. For example, in 1950, Brazil invested 75 times per capita more in a university student than in a primary student. We have done well since 1995, but we are still behind the developed countries. You know, in education, the right thing, if you do the right thing now, we are going to spend 20 years to get the results. Brazil, we do not have the demography anymore to improve our economy. India has. Brazil do not. The final results of past mistakes is low quality in human capital and low productivity in economy. What Brazil and I think that the most Latin American countries have to do is education, education, and education, but the priority is basic education, primary and secondary education. Thank you.
Thank you. So you talked about primary and secondary education, which as you rightly pointed out, has a long gestation in terms of when we can expect to see the results, right? But when you think of the BANTech or the more higher education, how have you solved for plugging the output of those institutions into the workforce? Is that something that's at all an issue in Brazil?
You are talking about basic education?
No, I'm talking about the higher education that you look after also.
The most of higher education in Brazil is private education. And nowadays, the government are giving a lot of scholarships for students to study in private colleges. And the entrepreneurs don't pay the tax as a balance of the scholarships. The problem is that, again, you have a lack of basic education, and the students come into the college, to the university, with a lack of prepare. And it's a problem to college education, to higher education.
Yeah. So, Mr. Ramdure, I wanted to connect that to something that you also talked about, which is the interface, and some statistics that that I was looking at recently. The perception of higher education folks who think that our graduates are employable versus the perception of employers looking for those, there's almost a 40%, so 85% of the educators believe that this class is employable, while only about 40% of the employers actually find that class to be employable. How do we bridge that gap, in the 3 to 5 year time frame, because anything more fundamental will take more time?
No, I think the connect between the industry and the academic institutions has to be very strong. If you take our own company, TCS, we have been having these academic interface programs for the last 13 years, where on an annual basis, we just get together with the heads of the academic institutions, whether they are from the engineering colleges, the IITs, or the second tier, third tier colleges, the management schools, or some of the science curriculum schools as well. I think that is where the feedback happens with regard to what we feel about the students we recruited from those institutions, what is the kind of ranking with regard to the faculty, with regard to the infrastructure, with regard to the curriculum itself, and then they modify it and then come back the next year. We take some of the faculties on sabbaticals into the industry or into our own system, and then also send some of our associates for training in the academic institutions itself. I think this dialogue and a continuous interface and a continuous interchange is the only way you are going to say at the end of it how much of the output is employable or not. Yeah. That does not mean that you don't have to customize your training to suit the requirements of your business, but I think you are only minimizing it. If it was about 10 years ago, we would have taken about a year. Today, we take only about 3 months to get a graduate into productive workforce, and we go to almost 400 plus universities, both across the country and outside.
Well, may the tribe increase, because TCS certainly is at the forefront of this sort of experimentation and succeeding at that. Professor Wang, you talked about a model which sounded to me a very purposeful, whether state or kind of a central authority directed one. How do you see that as China's own evolution happens further, or as you talked about the World Talent Organization, this notion gets into societies which are less used to a single directive or a sort of a model?
Well, I think that China, of course, on the one hand is governed. I think the policy frame is encouraging the talent development and the talent, the returning the talent. But on the other hand, China is also has to be reforming its education system. For example, China this year, the Premier Wen Jiabao has finally made the China educational budget reach the 4% of the GDP percentage. But still, China's education facing an enormous challenge. For example, last year there's about, like percentage-wise, 9 students, apply to university, 7 gets into the university. But Chinese education system is having enormous crisis because there are students going abroad. 1 million students drop out of the national entrance exam last year. And then 400 of them go and study overseas. Mm-hmm. And then we see that more and more happening, even Taiwan and Hong Kong and all those places, students are going to those places. So there's a market forces that attracting students going everywhere. So China has to really not only have the policy in place, but also have to have the market competition and things like that put into place. So China now is really now looking at the international system. For example, you have Nottingham set up a university in Ningbo, and you have Liverpool set up a university in Suzhou, and then recently NYU has set up a campus in Pudong in Shanghai. So we see some international element there that really trying to bring up the Chinese education system. But on the other hand, also that you talk about the international organization, this kind of the concept. For example, recently, our Center for China Globalization, and also together with the China State Foreign Experts Administration, plus Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, we've been doing some study about talent flow between China and Canada, because there's about 2 million Canadian diaspora in China as well. So, yeah. So there's also in Canada, and then that will be interesting to study this new wave of talent. I think for our conference, this is great, the growth net and then the emerging market. I think emerging market has the biggest talent floating around the world. India and China is the largest, sending student and also talent flowing around the world. And it probably is good to start up something new about this World Talent Organization and then examine all those issues, have a new topics that we can really establish some results and then achievement. So I think that in China, the market forces will play some role, and its combination with government intervention, plus these market forces. For example, you look at it today, all the internet industry in China. You look at the high-tech industry in China, and look at all the biotech and all those other education, management, consulting, think tanks, all those things, soft stuff. All of them, quite a lot of them actually, are from overseas, those talents. Yeah. Overseas talent also brought in the 70% of Chinese investment, either invest by them or through them. So I think this overseas talent is really crucial for China to continue to grow in the next 30 years.
Excellent. Okay, just one final topic on which I would love to hear from all of the panelists before I throw open to the House for questions, which is what sort of talent are we trying to build? You know, when I talk to my clients, they talk essentially, at least in this part of the world, as we hire based on functional skills, but then train for cognitive and behavioral skills or attitudinal skills. So in our talent management system, or in preparing the talent, you know, what's the center of gravity that we would, that you think is there today or should there be tomorrow in terms of, functional versus attitudinal or cognitive skills? Any thoughts, Mr. Aguirre?
Myself?
Yeah.
I think that the students have to know your own language first very well. Math and science. In Latin America, we have a big gap in how to teach well science and math. The most of teachers and the most teachers' school, teachers' college prepare the teachers for humanities and not for science and math. And these are producing a big gap all over the continent.
Thank you. Mr. Ramdhara.
I think when you talk about the functional and the attitudinal, let me first touch upon the functional skills, which is the role of the academic institutions to give on the discipline he or she has chosen, namely the student, to incorporate those functional skills. Now, the critical thing that is needed because of the diversity in the quality of the colleges, the governance and a governance framework is absolutely critical, and a commonality of purpose must be established. What is it that you are running the institution for, and how it is being managed from all aspects? When I say how it is being managed from all aspects, you have got to look at quality of the faculty, training the faculty have undergone, the interface with the industry we talked about, or the infrastructure that is there in the colleges or the schools themselves, and the interdisciplinary nature of the collaboration that happens, because that's the world we are going to be more and more encountering. This is the functional part of it, which is very essential in an academic institution. So industry normally assumes, because of the industry participation, that the functional part of it is given, and that's where they can easily find out during an interview process. When you come to the attitudinal ones, while the academic institutions may give a smaller dose of it, but the responsibility of the industry or the employer is to make sure the soft skills and the relevance to the marketplace is incorporated as part of their training or skilling itself. So the industry must invest in the soft skill part of it, because you are in a globalized world, and if you are talking about a talent mobility that is across cultures, across any part of the country, including the language differences, the soft skill part of it becomes extremely important. You can't get a Chinese into India, even if he had the talent, unless they understand English or a dose of English which they can relate or communicate with. Similarly, a person going from here to China, even if the talent mobility was there, understanding that culture and understanding the Chinese language is going to be very fundamental. You can always hire a local, but these are some things which are very, very essential.
Thank you. Professor Wang?
Yeah. I think that one of the key challenges actually in China, for example, is facing is really how to be innovative. You know, China, the education system seems to produce a lot of graduates that are doing well on exams, but not really creative and innovative enough to make China into an innovative country. So I think, in that respect, one of the things that the isolation of China's education system in terms of the student. For example, China now has about 30 million students in the college, of all the years. Mm-hmm. But international students only about the 11 million taking degrees. So that's works about 0.3%. We know that in the developed countries, international students counts about 5%, even 10%. University in Hong Kong counts about 10%. Harvard has 20%. So So very, very homogeneous environment for the student. And another thing is that the faculty as well. The faculty in China is also quite domestic sourced, cultivated and trained. And we don't have enough international talents. So that's another thing, that we don't have enough international students. So I think all those things, plus the Chinese education system needs to really break out this kind of a seniority system that really, once you get into university, you stay there forever. So that kind of innovation China has to adopt. I think currently China is having a National People's Congress and also CCPCC conference as well. And then a lot of delegates are talking about the Chinese education. I think if that is not really reformed, China probably going to fail its future expectation of becoming an innovative country.
Yep.
I just, what was the percentage of the international students in China?
11,000, I think, divided by the...
Yeah, I think there is something, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for those remarks. And now I'm going to ask the audience if there's any questions. Yes, Miss.
So I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Ramzulai. Good morning, sir. Good afternoon. So it's a very personal question, but because I'm a student of Delhi University and I'm pursuing my bachelor's, I was just wondering that whenever it comes to becoming an apprentice or interning, it's always subject to an engineering student or a management student or a law student, I'm pursuing economics, and if I want to intern or be an apprentice, I have to wait till I do my master's or maybe a PhD. Before that, I don't really have any opportunities, even if I want to go in to research later on. While if you see abroad, the universities are offering such opportunities. I mean, a specialized internship, not just like social work. So, I mean, why is it that we don't have such skill developing opportunities at a bachelor's level? Because, I mean, a lot of students do want to work immediately after that, before they pursue further education.
Now, see, this whole apprenticeship program, we are currently dialoguing with the Ministry of Labor and Employment to relook at it afresh. The archaic laws which are prevalent in our apprenticeship system even has a problem in the higher education or highly qualified people, or in the vocational education people who need the apprenticeship program. The scale we are talking about in a country like ours is today there are only 2.5 lakh apprentices, and we want to increase it to 30 lakhs at a minimum per year. So I think the inclusiveness part which you are asking for will certainly be part of that dialogue. We are fairly advanced stages of including the apprenticeship from all disciplines. So I'm sure there will be some resolution to this.
Thank you, Miss. Yes.
I have a question both for Professor Wang and Mr. Ramaduraj.
Can you just identify yourself
Yeah,
and your organization, please, just for the record?
I'm Amit Bhatia from Aspire, an employability education firm. I have a question both for Professor Wang and Dr. Raman. Professor Wang, specifically you mentioned about China's strategy moving from population dividend to talent dividend was the word you used. Mm-hmm. And you spoke about 200 million new graduates as against 200 million new. I think it'll be great if you can talk a little bit how you think about which are the sectors which are going to create those jobs. How are you making sure these graduates will have the skills for those sectors? So that's one part of the question. Second, I think just on the manufacturing side, now that you've had 3 decades of this growth, how has the labor costs moved? Do you at all fear that, like Indian IT industry, as the labor, that you're going to lose out at some point in time this advantage to Vietnam, to Indonesia? How's the labor cost move over the last 2 decades? So that's really the question on this thing. Dr. Ramadura, I know, the quantitative numbers will get solved with you advising the government. I think I had a question more on the qualitative side. I think, 10 years into independence, we created both IITs and ITIs roughly in the same breath and continued the caste system. I think the German example you gave is all about there's great pride students take in doing applied sciences or vocational as we call it. In India, there is no pride for young students going into ITIs. In fact, 100 kilometers from here, you'll find ITIs where staff is more than the number of students. So how do we intend as a society to resolve that issue of just honor pride working with our own hands as against everyone aspiring to do a service sector job. And second, I think as you spoke about, corporate sector getting more aligned with academia, will these sector skill councils ever be able to get corporations to kind of mandate you take people with certain skill sets? So long question, but that's it.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think the first question to talk about those 200 million graduates that are going to be working Chinese working population during now from next decade. What are those shifts? I think there is quite a lot of shift actually in China. For the past 30 years, China basically relied on the migrant workers to really make China manufacturing center of the world. But now China is really catching up on terms of the technology, telecommunication, internet, and all those sectors. For example, you probably know that there's Alibaba that has recently innovated a lot of new portals. Alibaba have a lot of shops online, which employs over several million people in China. And all those are newly graduates that really can focus. Like Baidu is a search engine of equivalent of Google in China. It employs about 20,000 people, all college graduates. And the average year for them is 26 years old. And then enough same for other industries. So I think there is a lot of that kind of catch up. And also, as you can see, China has 6 million mobile phone users and all those the internet users that we're going to generate a lot of new jobs for those new graduates that really carry China up to the next phase. So that's probably the advantage of those. But then the question is how continues to be innovative. That really need to China's education system to really address that. But on your second question, you talk about the labor shortage, the labor cost. That's true. China is really having a huge labor cost rise in the last decade. And we see the coastal area, there's really a shortage of labor now. Because all those labor from rural areas, from hinterland, now going back home and then stayed home now. They don't want to come out. They don't want to separate between husband and wives and things like that. So coastal area has some, the problem that they're having now. But the hinterland, the inland, is not really booming now. For the GDP growth in Sichuan and those western provinces, in the Hubei and are better than actually the coastal areas. And we see that, for example, Fortune magazine is going to have its annual meeting in Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan province, which is southwest of China. And in Chengdu, they have 250 Fortune 500 companies working there. Half of the Apple iPad was made in Chengdu, and half of the world chips is made in Chengdu. So we see that kind of a shifting happening. So there are several China. There's China on the coast of China, there's inland China, and then when this coastal China getting into the labor shortage, the inland China is catching up. But of course, there's also companies going to other countries. But I think, if you consider the logistics, consider the labor force, the quality, and then the value chain that already exists in China, I think still China is still favorable for many companies to come.
And one would hope that the labor costs do rise because exporting poverty is not a sustainable or a desirable growth model. Mr. Amdurai?
Yeah, with regard to your question on the service industry or service skills being more popular than anything else, or vocational skills or skills as a way instead of education as an option for kids is very, very relevant. It has to be addressed in a number of ways which we are trying to attempt. It's not going to be an overnight process, it's going to be a long haul, and all of us must recognize that. The advocacy starts with the parents because parents are one of the clear examples of who tell the kids that vocational education is not good for you. Second intervention which we need to do is at the school level, namely at the middle level schools where the dexterity, the aptitude and enablement of the kids into the vocational streams become a way of life, which means the infrastructure in the schools must address it. Following that, we need to avoid the dropout of the school kids because they go into areas where they are not comfortable at all, whereas they would be terrific in a vocational education. And then taking them into the ITI stream or the IIT stream, depending upon how they fare or what their aptitude is the biggest opportunity or biggest challenge. Then we need to give the mobility between one stream to another, namely from the vocational, taking the credits, like I mentioned, to the educational system. I think between the MHRD and the MOL, we are trying to put these collective things together as a single system. And like I said, it's going to be a long haul. So advocacy to enablement in terms of aptitude, in terms of access, in terms of making sure that there is mobility across. Now with regard to the enablers, in addition to this, why should manufacturing jobs be of interest? I think we need to create a number of enablers, namely the manufacturing policy is one of the enablers, the semiconductor policy is one of the enablers, but more importantly, the world skills competition and skills competition across different parts, where it excites the kids to participate in it through some of the other disciplines, in addition to the service sector itself, which we are focusing a lot to make sure that there is a movement in this space. Now the next one with regard to the sector skill councils, that's one of the most important things, because you need to say what is the level in terms of the occupational standards and the competency levels. And for that, we are not going to be doing it in isolation, because there's a lot of learning, whether from the Germans, the Singaporeans, the Austrians, the Irish, the British, the community colleges in the US, etc. So we are bringing the best learnings and allowing models of different partnerships between the academic institutions, the industry, and partnering in the local environment itself. I think an environment here is going to be multiple things to be tried out without any fear. Some of them may not succeed, but at the end of the day, if you want to achieve scale with the right skills and employability and employment, we have to be very free and open to try multiple things. And government as an enabler is trying everything, and we are pushing them to do the kind of things which are needed. The industry has to pitch in. I talked about the apprenticeship program. The industry has to pitch in with the faculty. The industry has to be pitch in with the curriculum that is needed to be developed, which is relevant to the industry itself. Mutual learnings and partnering is only the way to move forward.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Vikram Badshah from RP Sanjeev Goenka Group. Dr. Ramadurai, I just wanted to know whether we are planning at the national level a program for vocational development of children who are not academically inclined.
Children who are not?
Academically inclined to higher studies.
Correct.
That is very prevalent abroad in many countries, but seems to be missing here at the moment. You have mentioned that we are working towards it, but we'd like to hear more about that.
No, I think we have already said that as you introduce the vocational education in the schools, we are currently running some experiments or pilots in Haryana, in the state of Assam, and starting in West Bengal and Karnataka. The schools should introduce in the classes 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, the vocational education in certain trades, with the credits that would be given to the students, which they can take it to the vocational stream itself. I think the ITI also, recognition of prior learning through certain testing, if they qualify, we can take it to the educational system again. These are some very clear examples of action on the ground, and once these pilots are successful, we want to scale up and roll out in a big way. Also, a national skills framework is being drawn up, where again it's an integrated view of coming with a single framework between the MHRD and MOL, and that would be deployed hopefully this financial year.
That's absolutely a great question. Thank you for asking. South Korea, for example, has this system where, active intervention to reduce the stigma attached with not going to a regular college, is managed. And very, very pleased to hear what Mr. Ramadurai just answered. Yes, sir.
Sir, I'm Shariq Amin. Sir, I want to talk about the supply and demand concept. Sir, I'm an MBA student. I will take the example of MBA. Sir, every year in our country, 5 lakh MBA graduates are out of this college, but the requirement of these graduates are only 2 lakhs. So automatically, these 3 lakhs of the people are unemployed. And I'm talking about the skilled people. They are the skilled people who have that knowledge of academic also, practical knowledge also. So, sir, I would like to know that what government is doing for these people who are not, like they have the skill, but the requirement is not there.
And my own response is, first of all, I don't understand why they did their MBA. Having done their MBA and you are still saying they have the skills, they should not have a problem finding a job, because there is a demand for skills. So I think they should rewrite their resumes with the skills rather than with their MBA degree, and then take the test where the skills are being tested, whether it's in the engineering firms, small and medium enterprises, or the large firms. I think the government can do very little because you chose your option to go for an MBA. The government didn't ask you to go for an MBA. So I think we have to listen to ourselves to say that what is my aptitude and what is the direction I want to take as a profession, and excel in it, and then the government enables it to make sure that you can do that. So some of the structures we are putting in place for recognition of the vocational education in terms of credits are steps in the right direction. Even recognizing prior learning is one of the steps we are taking, so that if you say a person has a skill, he or she must demonstrate that skill to a certifying agency. For example, if he says I have a welding skill, the Indian Welding Society would certify that, which is recognized all over the world. So we need to look at that, and students must understand what are the options available to them, and they should be willing to take the test that may go with it or demonstrate proficiency in that stream.
Great stuff. Yes, Miss.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for a very interesting discussion.
Identify yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm a recent graduate from the London School of Economics in Human Resource Management. My question is to Professor Wang. You talked about a one talent organization, but recently in the current years, we've seen a step towards a more protectionist measures with respect to labor mobility in almost all the countries. So my question is that assuming the current economic conditions continue, where do you see this going? Do you think the trend will continue, or do you see your vision of an increased labor mobility? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. Well, according to the United Nations, there's about 200 million people working outside their home countries. That accounts about 3% of the world population. And that still keep a pace at 3%. The reason I'm saying that is, for example, China. Now we have about, since China opened up, there's about almost 3 million students went abroad. And currently there's about 400,000. Next year could be 500,000, 500,000. So we see a huge trend of people moving around. And you go to China these days, the airport is getting bigger and bigger. Right. And according to the Chinese ambassador to the United States, Zhang Yeshui, and he told me that there's about 10,000 people across Pacific every day. So that's not even for China, but also China, Europe, and India, China. And so China has 50 million overseas Chinese, and India has about 25 million or 30 million. And that's a huge talent moving around. What I would say is that now the world is really getting smaller. And in the past, we have the physical community. But in the future, there's a virtual community, people really online and connected everywhere. So there's a need for multilateral arrangement, the global governance, in terms of those talent flow, the credential recognitions. Even there's a talent war going on, and how to really regulate that. I think that's really not only the problem of the developed country, but also emerging countries. So I think it's really good to set up a mechanism on that and really discuss the issues, the facilitation of this talent flow. And then that really, in the future, we will see that really happen. The next wave of globalization is these people that are moving around. And the reason that China has been so prosperous is because China unleashed 200 million migrant people moving around in China. And that really made China prosperous. So if you see more world talent moving around across the globe, I see this world is getting better, and there's more trust, there's more peace, and there's more prosperity.
Ingo Plöger from Brazil. I want to make a question to Mauro Sadzaguiar, 2 questions. First is, what's the importance of the distance learning to the face-to-face learning in the ability for skills? And is it improving? It's getting more and more important? And how is the possibility to interact with other countries? Second question is, the precondition of skills education is to have people who is able to absorb it. So early childhood issues are more and more important in every country. How do you see that?
We are in Brazil. There is a movement from entrepreneurs to pay attention to early child education, because we know in public system, all the time the teachers claim that the students don't learn. And why the students don't learn? Because there is a lack of education from 0 to 4. And now the Brazilian society are pressed, and not only entrepreneurs, but the basic society are pressed for early child education. This is what you asked.
Distance learning.
Distance learning. I think that it's very, very important for higher education. I don't agree that I don't believe that in basic education is efficient the long distance learning, but for a country as huge as Brazil, I think that long distance education is very, very important. But again, I think that to solve the problem of basic education in huge countries as Brazil, India, China, the only way is to use technology. Technology, softwares that standard the way that the teacher is going to teach. And now with the Wi-Fi technology and tablets, it is becoming more close, more possible that the system really works.
Great. Thank you. One final question, and then we'll sum up. Yes?
No.
Hi, I'm Megha from Bain & Company. My question is very specific to India and hence for Mr. Ramadurai. We've spoken about people flocking towards MBAs, there being a lot of focus on engineering, and we even spoke about vocational education. What are your views on design and innovation in India? Specifically, I'm speaking about whether it could be in high-tech, automotive, software. What do you think, what are your views on the status today? Where do you think that's in the order of priority? And what role do you think the government and the industry can play in helping us bridge the gaps that exist?
No, I think when you look at the engineering and industrial services, I think between the engineering services companies and the IT industry itself, it's one of the growth opportunities and the growth areas where the size of that pie is approaching almost $7 to $8 billion of services in the engineering space. That includes design, industrial design engineering, that includes the complex parts that are being designed and designed for manufacture, and most of the design is being done in the CAD workstations, as an example, using some of the software like CATIA, etc. So to me, this is an area which is of extreme relevance and extremely important for our own well-being. But then to design any product, the frugal innovation and the frugal engineering we talked about yesterday is going to be very critical, because the consumption is in terms of masses and affordability, and that's where the opportunity and the excitement comes. I think it's an interdisciplinary nature of work. It's not just engineers alone, and that makes it a lot more exciting. For example, I know we have built simulator-based learning for a welding equipment, where 50 to 60% of the welding can be learned on the simulator, and only about 50% or 40% has to be done in the actual welding, which reduces the consumption of the materials and the energy itself. And the cost reductions are of the orders of magnitude, where an imported one costs 25 lakh of rupees. We've been able to get it down to 2.5 lakh of rupees for the welding simulator itself. And these are the kind of things which we need to make it aware very well. But here is an opportunity, and that's why the national manufacturing policy, when they talk about 100 million jobs, it requires a lot of jobs which are in the creative space of engineering design, and we can stand to gain, but learn from other parts of the world. Quality, excellence, and an interdisciplinary approach is what I think is going to take us. There is enough talent available in our country to address this, but people must be sensitized that here is an opportunity, and a big opportunity.
Great. Well, before we conclude, I just wanted to say a few words to bring us back to the framing that I'd laid out, and thank you very much, panelists, for your inputs. The way I see it, Mr. Ramdurai said it, everyone wants to migrate towards the northeast of the map that was up on the screen. The issue really is that without concerted action, it's not going to happen, and Mr. Ramdurai pointed out a number of things which is either academia or industry or government or all three of them need to do together to make that happen, whether it's access to finance, conducive environment, and a number of other things. I think the question around ITI, etc., was also very relevant in that context, because the talent and the skilling is not really about the top 1% of our society. The talent and skilling is really about the belly of the beast, which is a number of millions of people in our country or in any other emerging country, for example, for that matter. I think the example from China is really an instructive one. There are a number of elements in how China has managed from the 200 million migrants to 200 million college graduates. We are yet to see how the 200 million college graduates will play out, but if past is any indication, the future is going to be bright for your country and the results of what you'd outlined. And then, Mr. Aguirre, the points that you made about the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic of primary education, at some level, yes, they have a long gestation period, but at some stage it has got to be started. So it's hugely important to look at the skilling agenda, once we've sorted out some of the shorter term things, also from this longer horizon sense. And thank you very much for all of the questions and your participation. And with that, we can bring this session to a close.
Thank you.